Or even when Turkey threatens Cyprus, that there will be severe consequences if we proceed ahead with our energy program. Or even when Turkey threatens neighboring states and energy companies with which we are cooperating and have established conventional obligations. Is it possible for the efforts of the Secretary General to succeed when recent public statements and acts by Turkish officials signaling to plans for settling the fenced area of Varosha, the uninhabited part of Famagusta, under illegal Turkish military occupation? Ladies and gentlemen, as regards Varosha, I wish to stress that its distinct status was recognized in all reports of the Secretary General and the UN operations in Cyprus. More specifically, the framework for the settlement of Varosha by its lawful inhabitants under UN auspices was set as a priority both by the 1979 high-level agreement between the leaders of the two communities and the UN Security Council resolutions 550 and 789. In this regard, we deeply appreciate the recent reaffirmation by the Secretary General that the position of the United Nations on the matter remains unchanged and guided by the Security Council resolutions. Mr. President, Excellencies, as we speak, we are also confronted with an increasingly aggressive positioning of the Turkish military and an escalation of violations in the buffer zone. All these developments make the role of the UN peacekeeping force in Cyprus and the fulfillment of its mandate more necessary than ever. Excellencies, and thus, if it is not enough that we are confronted with the above-mentioned challenges, the Turkish President, Mr. Erdogan, 2 days ago, in this August Assembly, embarked on misleading allegations. He referred, amongst others, to an uncompromised position of the Greek Cypriot side, and that those who claim to solve the Cyprus problem under the condition of zero security, zero guarantees, have ill intentions from the beginning. And I wonder, dear friends, is it uncompromising and an ill intention to aspire establishing an independent and sovereign state free from the presence of occupation troops? Is it uncompromising and an ill intention to envision terminating an anachronistic treaty of guarantees and establishing a robust system of security based always on the Charter of the UN and the treaties of the European Union? Which other of the 193 UN member states is under guarantees by a third country? Is it uncompromising and an ill intention to aspire establishing a normal state in which all decisions will only be taken by Cypriots free from foreign dependencies? But he also alleged that the Greek Cypriot side refuses to share the political power and prosperity with the Turkish Cypriots. Do we refuse to share political power and prosperity with the Turkish Cypriots when we have accepted political equality as defined by the Secretary General and upheld by Security Council resolutions? When the Greek and Turkish Cypriot communities, within the context of the negotiating process, reached an agreement on the issue of natural resources in line with the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. We have also conveyed our readiness, always within the framework of meaningful negotiations, to deposit revenues accrued from the exploitation of hydrocarbons to an escrow account for the Turkish Cypriot community. An escrow account through which we are protecting the rightful share of the Turkish Cypriot community in accordance always with the population ratio of the future constituent states. President Erdogan also claimed that Turkey has a reasonable approach on the issue of energy resources and that they will protect the legitimate rights of the Turkish Cypriots until the very end. Is it a reasonable approach to unilaterally and unlawfully conduct hydrocarbon exploration drillings in another country's exclusive economic zone through the threat of use of force? And I wonder, whose interest is Turkey protecting when its claims limit for its own benefit the exclusive economic zone of Cyprus by 44% at the expense of the rights and interests of both Greek and Turkish Cypriots? Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as I have stated, it was not, and it is not my intention to embark on a confrontation. To the contrary, I fully ascribe to Mr. Erdogan's emotional concluding remarks as they encapsulate the essence of what we are trying to achieve in Cyprus: freedom, peace, prosperity, justice, and a peaceful and safe future for all. This is my vision. This is the vision of the people of Cyprus, to end the unacceptable status quo with a state which will ensure common and prosperous future for the coming generation of Greek and Turkish Cypriots. A future which will allow them to live freely together and jointly collaborate under conditions of stability, safety, and peaceful coexistence. Only then we will be able to utilize the unfulfilled potential and capabilities of our country. I will not deviate from pursuing this vision, and I too call on your solidarity in supporting the efforts to reach a solution on the Cyprus problem. This is not only to the interest of the people of Cyprus, but also to the benefit and interest of Turkey, of the region, and the international community. Mr. President, Excellencies, I might have devoted a large part of my speech on the Cyprus problem. I do not neglect, however, or overlook the vast importance of global challenges, particularly poverty, climate change, and sustainable development. The only solution in tackling these challenges rests to the decisiveness of the United Nations member states, so as to finally leave aside short-term interests and expediencies and reach a joint understanding of the need to fully adhere to the UN Charter, resolutions, and decisions of our common family. Only then we will fulfill our collective aims and targets and bestow a better future to our children, grandchildren, and the generations to come. Thank you very much for your attention.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Cyprus for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the Head of State. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Alexander Vučić, President of the Republic of Serbia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Alexander Vučić, President of the Republic of Serbia, and to invite him to address the Assembly. Mr. President.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor to address you as the President of the Republic of Serbia, country of good and honest people, who gave me their trust and honored me to represent them here in front of you in a world where they, through their hard work, regained the place that belongs to them. Last time I was here 2 years ago, in this same place, it was said that the situation in the world was harder than in previous 2016. I wouldn't say that in 2019 it is any easier. On the contrary. My dear friends, you have noticed that all of us, like children, gather in this big hall when we need to hear what great powers think about us and our future. A bit scared, a bit worried, we are happy that it is finished and we were not mentioned in their speeches. Unfortunately, we look with mockery those who were mentioned because we were not in their shoes. And in such a way, we have survived another year. And I do not speak about one, but about all great powers. I come from a small country, indeed the biggest one in the Western Balkans, which has suffered the most in the World War I. I come from people that have survived the most ferocious sufferings and Jasenovac genocide in the World War II, and people who more than anything wants to have peace, stability, and possibility to progress in the 21st century. Former Yugoslavia and its legal successor Serbia was one of the founders of the non-aligned movement. Today, we are on our EU path, and it is a strategic commitment of our country. But stronger than ever, in this distinguished hall and at any other place, we will advocate not only respect for the right, independence, and sovereignty of small countries, but also always to be capable to preserve equality and our right to freedom and independent decision-making by acting together. That's why I'm going to speak about Serbia and the region, because one does not go without the other. Let me paraphrase Ernest Hemingway, Serbia is not an island, but I proudly say part of the Balkans, and it is stronger if those around it are stronger. That is why I strive for the region, almost to the same extent I strive for Serbia. That is why we are so eager for the Balkans to accept the policy of cooperation. That's why we will always strive for talking to each other. We'll always advocate a policy of peace and cooperation because it is the only way for creating the necessary stability without which there is no economic growth and progress. I'm coming from the country which had to face terribly difficult reforms in 2014. We were on the brim of bankruptcy and total disaster. Today, Serbia has no problems with public finances, and I want to say wonderful news to the citizens of my country. We expect that one of the biggest world credit agencies, even tomorrow, will not only increase the outlook, but also the credit rating of our country. According to projections by the IMF experts, GDP of Serbia will cumulatively grow by 12.5% or 4% a year in coming 3 years. This result will not be reached by any other country in the region. The IMF envisages that GDP per capita, which is an adequate indicator of the living standards, will be $10.4 in 2023, $10,394 in 2023. It is an increase of about 45% comparing to $7,207 from the last year, so almost twice more in only 5 years. Precisely with its stable economic situation, Serbia attracted in the first 7 months of this year 2.32 billion euro foreign direct investments, which is much more than in the same period last year, and it was the most successful year for Serbia. And finally, Serbia has far the lowest unemployment rate in the region, 10.3%. Additionally, we invest in the future of Serbia through knowledge, and now we are known for export of IT products and software. Last year, that export exceeded 1 billion euro. And now there is an important question. Do we live well? Do people in the region live well? No. We need decades of peace, hard and diligent work, and great successes in order to bring ourselves closer to the developed European countries. Nevertheless, under such conditions and due to the economic progress, Serbia chose the independent foreign policy, independent decision-making as its path towards the future, and that is why we don't hide anywhere, and not even in this hall, but we praise with good and friendly relations we have with the People's Republic of China, Russian Federation, and wish better and better relations with the USA. because our job is to take care of our people, and we do not care what someone else in the world might tell us. Whether we were buying gas or chocolates, we choose the most quality and the most affordable goods, and we do not care what other big powers think of the respective, because we think that we are entitled to think and decide about our own destiny and what's the best for our own people, and not what other big and powerful ones think. You all know that we are facing problems regarding territorial integrity of Serbia, actually that we are facing the pending issue of Kosovo and Metohija. The unresolved problem of Kosovo and Metohija affects more than anything economic progress and future of the young ones in the region and in Serbia. That is why I will speak about efforts to resolve it despite all the obstacles. Serbian writer and diplomat Jovan Dučić used to say that enemies are only our friends in disguise that are apart from us only by some kind of misunderstanding or prejudice. The centuries-long problem of Kosovo is far from misunderstanding or prejudice, but we have courageously and realistically, with will and faith, started the quest for lasting solution. Nobody cares more about solution of this difficult burden than Serbia, because it would provide to our country, but also to the entire region, peace, stability, cooperation, economic prosperity and progress on our EU path. That is why we expect the world, especially big powers, to see, understand and support our positions and arguments, as well as not to support moves that are going in opposite direction like they did in crucial years from 1999 and 2008. Like the American President John Kennedy said, we cannot negotiate with people who say what's mine is mine and what's yours is negotiable. That is why the lasting solution, the way I see it, should be reached in such a way that neither of the parties would gain everything, but they would gain enough. Even though we do not recognize the unilaterally declared independence of the so-called Kosovo, just like less and less countries does, because in accordance with the legally binding UN Security Council Resolution 1944, Kosovo and Metohija is the autonomous province within the Republic of Serbia under the administration of the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo, UNMIK, in desire for peace and stability. We had a dialogue with Albanians who live there and with the facilitation of the European Union. We reached, with our concessions, certain progress and witnessed it by signing Brussels Agreement. However, obligations taken by the respective agreement were met only by Serbia. We continued the dialogue despite frequent tensions and incidents in Kosovo and despite various unilateral moves of Pristina, which made it difficult all until it stopped due to most unreasonable unilateral moves of all due to 100% tariffs on import of Serbian goods, which actually means full termination of flow of goods. Since they imposed tariffs on November 21st, 2018, we lost about 350 million euro until 21st of August this year. Tariffs that are still in force also jeopardize normal and dignified life of the Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija. In all this time, Serbia reacted moderately and responsibly to Pristina's unilateral acts, not imposing countermeasures and trying to calm the situation down. Not only interests of Belgrade and Pristina are intertwined through the problems of Kosovo and Metohija, but also those of various international stakeholders. And as long as it continues in that way, Kosovo will be a source of endless political manipulations and instabilities. That is precisely why the presence of the United Nations through work of UNMIK is necessary as a guarantee of safety for Serbs living there. Despite everything, I believe that the agreement between Serbs and Albanians is of utmost importance for stability of the Balkans, and that those two nations have a role in our region that Winston Churchill meant for France and Germany when he spoke of uniting Europe. We are ready to continue to make efforts for reaching solution for the issue of Kosovo and Metohija. If that weren't the case, we would not be starting to build highway section next year from Niš to Pristina. Serbia has always been a crossroad, and as such, it became the seat of the transport community. We have just finished highway towards the North Macedonia. In the beginning of November, we inaugurate highway towards Bulgaria. We are building highway towards Montenegro, and there is an ongoing plan to connect with Romania by a better road. We build railroads towards Hungary, modernize railroads towards Montenegro and North Macedonia, and it is my wish to revive the railroad between Belgrade and Sarajevo. 3 days ago, I had a big and important meeting with prime ministers of the North Macedonia and Albania, and we agreed to start working for ourselves, for our region, not to unite, but to enable free flow of goods, capital and services, to start creating common market, to start with something a bit revolutionary, because nations in the Balkans do not need to serve only to the others, but together they can do the best and the greatest things for themselves. Until today, we fought for who is going to be in favor of 1, 2, or 3 big powers, and which power would create a better future for us. I'm not naive. I'm not naive at all, and I know that in the future we will depend on the big ones to a great extent. But everything we can do ourselves, we shouldn't and we would not leave to the others. And that is why the Balkans should belong to the Balkan nations, sovereign and free people that will know how to fight in the best way for their own future. We want the same for all other nations worldwide, and we will always fight for that in this distinguished institution. In about 10 days, Serbia is starting to build also a highway between Belgrade and Sarajevo, just like we have already built many roads and railroads, or just like we are building them because we want to be closer to all our neighbors, to get to know and understand each other better. But it's also a highway towards Banja Luka. Then there will be less accumulation of easy political points by cross-border insults and more cooperation. One of the ways to achieve the respective is establishment of the regional economic zone. And no one should be afraid that the idea of a new Yugoslavia is hiding behind this idea of that is an expression or desire for Serbian hegemony, just because it is coming from Belgrade. I believe that small divided markets of ours in the Western Balkans would be far more interesting to everyone if we would act together. And that regional cooperation and economic zone would not be a substitute for the European Union, but it could be an expression of our concern for ourselves, at least until we finalize that long process of accessing the European integration. Distinguished Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Serbia respects all member states of the United Nations and their territorial integrity and sovereignty. We have never asked, nor will we ever ask for something that is not ours. We expect to get the same level of respect. We do not give ourselves the right to divide the world into a good or bad one, or to evaluate what is right or what is wrong. But we are proud of our freedom-loving tradition and contribution, which throughout history we had been giving in fight for law and justice. We advocate that all open issues in the world are to be resolved in a peaceful manner and through dialogue, with respect of the international law and applicable UN resolutions. We want to cherish old friendships and build new ones. And that's why we proudly say here in this big and the most important hall throughout the world that we'll do our best to improve our cooperation with African, all Asian and Latin American countries. That's also the way how we see the future of Serbia and the future of the world. Friendship, however, is not something that was given once and forever. It should be kept and continuously nurtured, and in that regard, you can always rely on Serbia. And as I said, we are on our path towards the EU, and we have partnership relations with Western countries, including more and more intensive cooperation with the USA, but we are proud of our excellent relations with Russia and China. Cooperation with friendly African, Asia-Pacific and Latin American countries is also in focus of the Serbian foreign policy. If there is anything that a man can do well, I say let him do it. Give him a chance. With these words of great statesman Abraham Lincoln, Honest Abe, I would like to thank you for your attention. And at the very end, I will just use few Serbian words which will be very well understood in an entire region. Balkan, balkanskim narodima, živela Serbia. Thank you very much once again.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Serbia for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the Head of State. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Rumen Radev, President of the Republic of Bulgaria. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Rumen Radev, President of the Republic of Bulgaria, and to invite him to address the Assembly. Mr. President.
Dear Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. At the very outset, I would like to thank you, Mr. President, for your able guidance that I believe will lead us to the answers of the pressing challenges. Today, more than ever, we need to stand for rule-based multilateral system with the United Nations at its core. In this context, I'd like to express our support to the timely and important initiative launched by both Germany and France for the creation of an alliance for multilateralism, a network of like-minded nations working to foster effective multilateral approaches to global issues through the United Nations. This initiative perfectly matches this year's topic for the general debate. Allow me to say a few words on the different building elements of our main topic and its overarching theme, sustainable development for all parts of our planet. The High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development is the pivotal event in the markings of the 74th session of the UN General Assembly. There is a pressing need to accelerate the pace of progress in achieving all sustainable development goals. The human race is facing rapidly developing detrimental consequences of ever-growing overuse of natural resources and massive urbanization. Some human activities result in irreversible environmental pollution, in reducing biodiversity, and in threatening the fragile ecosystems. We commend UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres for convening the Climate Summit as a catalyst of the collective political will to reach lower and, over time, climate-neutral levels of industrial green gas emissions. This master message of the summit must ring out loudly from this highest international tribune. Bulgaria stands by its obligations undertaken under the Paris Agreement. My country will spare no efforts in transforming its economy in a way which will contribute to the common goal of keeping temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius and reaching net zero global emissions by 2050. Bulgaria has already reached the interim target of 18% share of renewable sources in the energy mix, thus becoming an EU champion. This year, Secretary General Guterres marked the first ever International Day of Education on January 24, putting education at the heart of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Bulgaria wholeheartedly subscribes to this assessment, that education is an engine for poverty eradication and a driving force for peace. As a member of the Human Rights Council, Bulgaria committed to empowerment of children with disabilities through inclusive education. The inclusive education is an essential tool for the whole process of social inclusion. In a world driven by information and communication technologies, we place a particular emphasis on the opportunities offered by education. In the years to come, the Bulgarian Commissioner in the European Commission will be in charge for the sector of youth, education, and innovations, which proves the importance we attach to these priorities. Global health is one of the major present-day global challenges. Bulgaria confirms its commitment towards achieving universal health coverage, as inscribed in our national priorities. We welcome the timely high-level meeting on the matter, as well as the Declaration on Universal Health Coverage and its ambitious call for action. The United Nations has unique array of tools for mediation, conflict prevention, peacekeeping, and peace building. We welcome Secretary General's vision for a closely interlinked reform of all key areas in this most important field. Bulgaria welcomes Secretary General's commitment to advance diplomacy for peace and stands ready to support his efforts to strengthen the role of mediation in conflict prevention, embodied in the Action for Peacekeeping initiative. Mr. President, international terrorism and violent extremism continue to pose a significant threat to international peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development. The international community should beef up efforts to strengthen counterterrorism cooperation by supporting the United Nations as a key player. Unfortunately, over the last year, the international community has not been able to reach a breakthrough in any major conflict around the world. The proclaimed military victory over the so-called ISIS Caliphate last March was not enough to bring the war-torn Middle East region closer to peace. The international community should stay vigilant as the terrorist threat still exists in different forms. Finding a political solution to the conflict in Syria is crucial for the stability and security of the region and beyond. We call for a nationwide cessation of hostilities and for the protection of civilians. It is imperative to ensure humanitarian access to all parts of the country. A lasting political process should be launched under the auspices of the United Nations, aimed at peaceful and inclusive political transition. A sustainable political solution should be sought through a genuine Syrian-owned political process in line with UN Security Council Resolution 2254 and the 2012 Geneva Communique. Bulgaria highly appreciates the commitment of the neighboring host countries to ease the suffering of the refugees. There is no military solution to the crisis in Libya. Bulgaria will continue to support the relaunch of the UN-led mediation process and the preparation of parliamentary and presidential elections when possible. The stabilization of Libya is of utmost importance for the regional security and for the management of migration flows in the Mediterranean. Bulgaria supports the close cooperation between the EU and the International Organization for Migration, aimed at increasing the number of voluntary returns and improving the conditions in the detention centers in Libya. Bulgaria will continue to support all efforts aimed at resuming the Israel-Palestine peace talks, including those of the Quartet on the Middle East peace process. A two-state solution is the only way to sustainable peace. The humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip is a cause of great concern. It should remain a priority of the United Nations and international community alike. The 5-year-long armed confrontation in Yemen clearly showed that durable and comprehensive solution to this conflict could not be achieved by military means. The effective end of hostilities would allow for improving the catastrophic humanitarian situation. Bulgaria supports the efforts to revive the political process, as well as the full implementation of the Stockholm Agreement as a starting point for peace settlement. It has been more than 5 years since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine. Despite periodic ceasefires, the situation in eastern Ukraine remains highly precarious. We call for a peaceful settlement of the crisis in accordance with General Assembly Resolution 68/262 of March 2014. The exchange of detainees is a sign of hope, but the parties to the conflict should implement in full the mutual agreed package of measurements and measures endorsed by the UN Secretary Council Resolution 2202. It is of vital importance that they abide by the ceasefire, complete the withdrawal of heavy weapons, and grant unhindered access to the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to all sides. Bulgaria expresses deep concern about the decision of Iran to suspend the implementation of some of its commitments under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action on this nuclear program. The return to full compliance with the nuclear deal and the further diplomatic outreach is the only prerequisite for lowering the tensions. Discussing the regional role and the ballistic missile program of Iran is to be addressed separately from the JCPA. We are also seriously concerned by the recent escalation of tension in the Persian Gulf. An immediate priority should be given to de-escalation measures aimed at avoiding further incidents. The resumption of the US-DPRK dialogue and the encouraging signals with regard to Pyongyang's readiness to engage in negotiations on denuclearization represent a qualitatively new phase in the international efforts. It is vital that summit agreements are followed by actions yielding tangible results. Bulgaria reiterates its support for the strict and effective implementation of the sanctions regime, as well as for keeping the channels of communication open. The multilateral efforts in non-proliferation and disarmament remain central. Next year, we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which coincides with the 2020 NPT Review Conference. For keeping the momentum, we need to reconfirm the validity of the treaty as the cornerstone of the nuclear non-proliferation regime. Bulgaria consistently supports the integration of the Western Balkans in the European Union. The process leading to membership is an investment in the stability. Bulgaria puts a special emphasis on the need for overcoming the legacies of the past in this region by actively building good neighborly relations. Bulgaria welcomes all initiatives to the benefits of the social and economic empowerment, especially of persons belonging to vulnerable groups. As a member of the UN Human Rights Council, my country is dedicated to remain active on the matter. I had the honor to address the Council in June this year and to confirm our commitment to champion the rights of those in need. As co-chair of the group of Friends of Children and working together with UNICEF, we strictly follow our principle, and I would like to strongly highlight that the family is the best environment for raising the children. Bulgaria is a champion in deinstitutionalization. Women around the world continue to be underrepresented in both government and private entities. They still constitute the majority of the world poor. I am proud that my country has an outstanding record in the field of women empowerment. Bulgaria is fully committed to the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325. Tolerance and understanding are values lying in the very foundation of democracy. Regrettably, nowadays, despite all efforts made, anti-Semitism continues to rear its ugly face. The rescue of the entire Jewish population of Bulgaria in 1943 is one of the stellar moments in our history. In the darkest ages of the World War II, not a single individual from the 50,000 Bulgarian Jewish community was sent to the camp of death. My country provided an example of how the civil society can defend the human values. Our national tradition of tolerance and respect for others obliges us to provide our clear response to growing anti-Semitism, xenophobia, and hate speech. Mr. President, next year will mark the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. Strong messages, mobilizing broad international approval, and bold and prompt concerted actions are more than ever needed today and will certainly be needed tomorrow. My message I would like to convey to all of you is also my personal belief that our mission is possible and our mission is made to be true. Thank you, Mr. President.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Bulgaria for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the head of state. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, and to invite him to address the Assembly. Mr. President.
Mr. President, colleague heads of state and government, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I congratulate you, Mr. President, on your assumption of the responsibility to steer the work of the 74th session of the General Assembly, and I assure you of Sierra Leone's full support during your tenure. I applaud Her Excellency Madam Fernanda Espinosa Garces of Ecuador for the effective manner in which she conducted the previous session. I commend the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, for his overall dedication and commitment to the work of the organization, including his effort in advancing the urgent need to address climate change. We commit in prayer memories of the late President Robert Mugabe. He was a dedicated Pan-Africanist whose pursuit for African integration, cooperation, and solidarity shall forever remain in our minds and hearts. Mr. President, the theme for this year, galvanizing multilateral efforts for poverty eradication, quality education, climate action, based on the commitment we made over the years. The issues are at the heart of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We therefore commend you for the timely choice of a theme that resonates with the aspiration of the people whom we all represent. Mr. President, Sierra Leone supports the principle of collective engagement in both the prevention and settlement of conflicts and disputes, as well as the Secretary General's reform agenda in sustaining peace in all its facets, including the effort to reform peacekeeping. As a troop and police contributing country, Sierra Leone's active participation in the peacekeeping operations demonstrates our firm commitment to the promotion and maintenance of international peace and security. Let me reiterate the firm commitment to continue to contribute our fair share to maintain world peace. Mr. President, the need for Security Council reform is urgent and imperative. Mr. President, the need for Security Council reform is urgent and imperative. Our historic pledge to early reform of the Security Council as an essential element of our overall effort to reform the United Nations must be upheld and implemented without further delay. The legitimacy and effectiveness of the Security Council's decision, as well as the relevance of the United Nations, will continue to be questioned if urgent action is not taken to make the Council more broadly representative. Africa remains to be the only region without representation in the permanent category of the Security Council and is also underrepresented in the non-permanent category. In this context, Africa demands for 2 permanent seats with all the rights and prerogatives of current members, including the right of veto, and 2 additional non-permanent seats is a matter of common justice and the right to have an equal say in decision-making on issues pertaining to international peace and security. This long-standing injustice and imbalance perpetuated in the present configuration of the Security Council should be of grave concern to all of us, which ought to be addressed now. As the coordinator of the African Union Committee of 10 Heads of State and Government on the reform of the United Nations Security Council, we are convinced that this reform should address the long-standing injustice and imbalance in the present configuration of the Security Council. We believe that the prevailing geopolitical realities are compelling for a comprehensive reform of the Security Council to make way for equitable geographic representation. Africa's patience is being tested. We therefore urge the Assembly to collectively support our urgent call for Africa's representation in the Security Council as espoused in the Elzowini Consensus and SADC declarations. Mr. President, we pursue peace as a public common good, and we have played an important role in securing peace as a stand-alone goal of the 2030 Agenda. This is a strong case to make for the voices of billions of people living in the conflict-affected countries to be heard in the highest global decision-making organ, in particular the G7+ countries. Sierra Leone has always pursued country-led peace and resilience through national dialogue and reconciliation. We recently concluded a broad-based national consultative conference, Bintumani 3, where a nationally representative body resolved to establish a permanent and independent National Commission for Peace and Cohesion. We do so mindful that the peaceful coexistence and inclusive governance and are prerequisites to our development. Mr. President, development and poverty eradication must be well planned, inclusive and sustainable. It must transition our nation out of fragility. To this end, Sierra Leone has partnered with United Nations agencies and development partners to understand the dynamics and severity of poverty and map out possible approaches to eradicating poverty, SDG 1. This has culminated in the production of a national multidimensional poverty index, a report on multidimensional child poverty, and Sierra Leone's population policy in order to effectively measure and monitor. Mr. President, the aspirations of Sierra Leoneans are reflected in a detailed and costed 5-year medium-term national development plan titled Education for Development. The plan, aligned with the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the African Union's Agenda 2063, is based on an inclusive national consultative process. It ensures that people are at the center and own national development trajectory. Mr. President, eradicating poverty can only be achieved when we develop and improve our own nation's greatest resource, the people. Skilled, healthy, and productive human beings are the pathway to global success and prosperity. As a nation, we see human capital as a critical enabler for achieving the SDGs. My government has therefore allocated 21% of national budget to education. Consequently, pre-primary to secondary school education is free irrespective of gender, ability, or ethnicity, and we now have 2 million children enrolled in schools. We have expanded opportunity in education for girls by creating safe spaces in schools, campaigning vigorously against early marriage and sexual and gender-based violence. Girls admitted to study STEM disciplines in college are guaranteed scholarships. Technical and vocational education centers are now accessible to more Sierra Leonean girls and youth. And we are investing in more school infrastructure, transportation, sanitation, and health, feeding and retention programs. We are restructuring and redesigning our education system to deliver quality education that serves inclusive, sustainable national and private sector development. Our focus is to achieve fundamental age-appropriate learning outcomes in literacy, computational skills, and critical thinking. We invite the world to work with us. Through the Directorate of Science, Technology, and Innovation, we have developed a human capital development incubator with extensive real-time data on education in Sierra Leone and other components of human capital development flagship program. Policy interventions and investment in education, healthcare, and food security are increasingly informed by and driven by this real-time data. Sierra Leone continues to use the power of data to plan, make policy decisions, allocate resources, guide governance, and open new possibilities for private entrepreneurship and drive human capital development. We are open for partnerships. We are open for collaboration. We are open to ideas about how to continue improving the quality of education because we believe that our success in the global digital economy and the fourth industrial revolution is predicated on our investment in the future of our children. Mr. President, through partnerships and innovation, we have made great progress in establishing legal identity and birth registration by strengthening our national civil registration and vital statistics systems. We have also enrolled Africa's first blockchain national digital identity platform that will help children, citizens, grant access to approved institutions to digitally verify their identities. Governance, development planning, financial inclusion, and human rights imperatives, among others, guide our initiative to establish legal identity using a singular, securitized, and serially numbered instrument. We can also use the same instrument to strengthen healthcare planning, health information systems, disease surveillance, and monitor health interventions and outcomes. Mr. President, the threat of inequality, lack of opportunity, and exclusion of youth still persist. The anxiety over the growing youth population in Africa is complicated by increased poverty indicators, youth exclusion, perilous migration across the Mediterranean, transnational organized crime, terrorism, and violent extremism, and greater national and regional security threats. Sierra Leone is addressing the youth question through financial and social inclusion programs, skills training, and farming initiatives. We are pleased to be among 10 countries selected by the United Nations as pilot in the recently launched United Nations Youth Strategy. We look to collaborate across the region and with international partners and share lessons and best practices. Mr. President, our development agenda is inclusive and affirms the critical role of women. We have ratified the United Nations resolution on women, peace, and security. We are addressing the inclusion of women in governance and entrepreneurship. Our actions on child marriage, rape, and sexual and gender-based violence have been emphatic and uncompromising. We have passed progressive laws on sexual offenses, and a presidential task force directly advises the president on sexual and gender-based violence in Sierra Leone. We are also working to eliminate barriers to the inclusion of persons with disability. Mr. President, quality, affordable, and universal health care coverage is foundational to productivity and overall well-being. This is critical for our human capital development agenda. As a nation, we cannot afford the cost of not investing in health care and universal health coverage. We have maintained a right-based approach to healthcare coverage that aligns with SDG 3. We are focused on and request cooperation on reducing maternal child mortality, preventing epidemics, tropical and communicable diseases through increased disease detection, surveillance, and control, providing primary health care in accordance with the Astana Declaration, providing first-rate in-country medical diagnostic facilities, and strengthening capacity and resilience in the healthcare service delivery. Through all these efforts, we are leveraging innovation and technology to support healthcare delivery. We also believe that we cannot achieve universal health coverage without delivering mental health care for all. We are rewriting the mental health care legislation, and we are committed to community-based mental health care and treatment. We aim to change attitudes to mental health and provide affordable and integrated quality care that matches the burden of mental health conditions. We therefore welcome partnership towards achieving that goal. Mr. President, our focus as a government remains the delivery of accountable and transparent governance of the state through critical debates and engagement with all citizens on rights, governance, and development. We continue to work with civil society and the press as we expand the democratic space. my government has forwarded to Parliament a bill to completely repeal a 54-year-old law that criminalizes libel, which has been used in the past government to imprison journalists and to restrict press freedom. As co-chair of the Task Force on Justice, we strongly identify with and reiterate the Secretary General's call for accelerated commitment to addressing gaps in the justice delivery system. We have signaled that commitment as a country by establishing a special directorate within the Ministry of Justice to monitor, evaluate, and report on progress on access to justice for our most vulnerable. We are also using technology and innovation to digitize our court processes and thus fast-track justice delivery for all. We have undertaken governance reforms that foster the rule of law and public accountability. We continue to pursue a determined fight against corruption while minimizing waste and abuse of state resources. We are implementing business-friendly reforms that create a conducive ecosystem for private capital investment and entrepreneurship in our country. Mr. President, let me express my country's sincere appreciation to the Secretary General for convening the Climate Action Summit this September. Extreme weather events increase the risk of hunger, disease, forced immigration, conflict, and poverty. The science is indisputable. The effects on lives and livelihood are rare. The threats to our effort to achieve the 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals are clear and present. As a country, we are committed to a multilateral approach to fully implement the 2015 Paris Agreement. Our midterm National Development Plan provides for mitigation and adaptation strategies, including reviewing, formulating, and strengthening national policy actions on environmental management and governance. We are committed to green and sustainable energy generation. With the right partnership, the right attitude, and unflinching commitment to climate financing and continuing multilateral efforts, we can save our planet from the destructive impact of climate change. Mr. President, let me conclude by encouraging us all to keep sight of the shared responsibility we all have to ensure a peaceful and secured world for the next generation. Sierra Leone is a small but determined nation to play its part in the international system. We are committed to promoting peace and security, addressing the underlying causes of fragility and drivers of conflict, tackling the scourge of climate change, and thus building resilience and achieving the 2030 Agenda. Together, we can achieve this in this lifetime. Thank you all for your attention.
En nombre de la Asamblea General, deseo dar las gracias al excelentísimo Julius Maada Bio, presidente de la República Sierra Leona, por la declaración que acaba de formular. Ruego a los representantes que permanezcan sentados mientras despedimos al jefe de Estado. La Asamblea General escuchará un discurso del excelentísimo Félix Antoine Tshilombo Tshisekedi, presidente de la República Democrática del Congo. Pido protocolo que acompañe a su excelencia. En nombre de la Asamblea General tengo el honor de dar la bienvenida a las Naciones Unidas a Su Excelencia el señor Félix Antoine Tshilombo Tshisekedi, presidente de la República Democrática del Congo, a quien invito a dirigirse a la Asamblea.
Monsieur le Président, en m'adressant à cette auguste Assemblée, je voudrais, avant de poursuivre mon propos, féliciter Monsieur l'ambassadeur Tijani Muhammad Bande pour sa brillante élection en qualité de président de la 74e session ordinaire de l'Assemblée générale de l'Organisation des Nations unies. Mes félicitations s'étendent aux membres de son bureau et je tiens à formuler à l'ensemble de son équipe mes vœux de succès dans l'accomplissement de cette exaltante mission. Je voudrais aussi rendre un hommage appuyé à M. Antonio Guterres, secrétaire général des Nations unies, pour ses efforts inlassables en vue de raffermir notre organisation et renforcer son rôle dans la recherche de solutions aux problèmes qui menacent la paix, la sécurité et la prospérité dans le monde. Monsieur le Président, le thème de la présente session, à savoir dynamiser les efforts multilatéraux pour l'éradication de la pauvreté, l'éducation de qualité, l'action contre le changement climatique et l'inclusion, arrive à point nommé en ce moment particulièrement difficile pour le multilatéralisme. Alors que l'humanité tout entière est engagée dans un élan sans précédent dans le cadre de l'agenda du développement à l'horizon 2030. Cet agenda prévoit la réalisation des objectifs du développement durable, la mise en œuvre du programme d'action d'Addis Abeba sur le financement du développement et l'atteinte des objectifs fixés dans l'accord de Paris sur le climat. Les inégalités et le sentiment d'exclusion sont à l'origine des principales menaces sur la paix, la stabilité et le développement harmonieux. Ils alimentent les flux migratoires incontrôlés des peuples entiers à la recherche d'un meilleur avenir. Aussi bien dans les pays du Nord que dans ceux du Sud, ils accentuent les réflexes xénophobes, la montée en force des populismes, ainsi que la radicalisation des laissés pour compte. Les événements tragiques en Afrique du Sud en sont la pire illustration. Ces mouvements de frustration populaire qui, dans certaines régions, vont jusqu'à nourrir le terrorisme, prennent en otage le débat politique et nous empêchent d'apporter des réponses concertées aux problèmes qui nous affectent tous. Monsieur le Président, j'affirme du haut de cette Assemblée qu'aucun pays dans le monde ne peut à lui tout seul faire face à ces défis. L'unité, la solidarité, la tolérance et la coopération internationale sont des valeurs essentielles reflétées par nos pères fondateurs dans la charte de notre organisation universelle. Plus que jamais, le développement économique et social et l'épanouissement des peuples de la planète sont des droits fondamentaux et inaliénables. En tant que dirigeants, nous sommes porteurs de l'obligation d'œuvrer sans ménagement à garantir ces droits. Depuis des décennies, notre organisation commune s'efforce à s'adapter aux nouvelles réalités de ce monde en constante mutation. Afin d'être plus apte à relever durablement les défis du développement dans un monde globalisé, nous préconisons une réforme globale du système des Nations unies, notamment du Conseil de sécurité
et des agences du système des Nations Unies. Le processus de réforme du Conseil de sécurité doit être mené à son terme et prendre en compte la position commune africaine énoncée dans le consensus d'El-Zoul-Wini et dans la déclaration de Sirte. Il n'est pas juste, en effet, que l'Afrique demeure la seule région du monde sans représentation permanente au sein du Conseil de sécurité, alors que l'essentiel des enjeux démographiques, sociaux et environnementaux de la planète sont intrinsèquement liés à notre continent. Nous voulons une configuration du Conseil de sécurité juste et équitable, plus représentative des peuples du monde dans leur diversité et comptable de ses actes. Monsieur le Président, malgré les engagements au plus haut niveau que nous avons pris pour créer le monde que nous voulons à l'horizon 2030, près d'1 milliard de personnes vivent encore dans la faim, la malnutrition et l'extrême pauvreté, tandis que 118 millions de personnes en situation d'extrême pauvreté seront exposées à la sécheresse, aux inondations et à la chaleur en Afrique d'ici à 2030. Nous ne pouvons accepter la simple hypothèse d'un éventuel échec des engagements mondiaux à l'horizon 2030, surtout après le résultat très mitigé, en Afrique tout particulièrement, de la campagne des objectifs du millénaire pour le développement. L'éradication de la pauvreté et de la faim relève aujourd'hui de l'urgence. La République démocratique du Congo peut faire partie de la solution avec ses 80 millions d'hectares de terres arables et ses eaux abondantes capables de nourrir plus de 2 milliards d'individus. Le défi de l'accès à une éducation de qualité pour tous, second sujet du thème de la présente session, nous interpelle tout particulièrement car l'expérience du développement des décennies post-indépendance a renforcé notre conviction qu'il n'est de richesse que l'homme. C'est pourquoi, depuis 2011 déjà, nous avions fait nôtre l'idée force de l'agenda 2030 de ne laisser personne pour compte. Leave no one behind. À travers notre engagement bien connu de mes compatriotes intitulé « Le peuple d'abord ». Aussi, les grandes priorités sociales de mon mandat sont définies comme suit. Premièrement, rendre effective la gratuité de l'éducation primaire dans l'enseignement public tel que l'exige la Constitution de mon pays. Cet engagement est effectif depuis le début de ce mois sur toute l'étendue du territoire national. Il portera en une année la part des dépenses d'éducation de 8% à près de 20% du budget de l'État, soit un niveau proche des standards recommandés par l'UNESCO. Deuxièmement, promouvoir une meilleure adéquation entre l'enseignement et l'emploi à travers une stratégie de formation technique et professionnelle ambitieuse, conçue et mise en œuvre en partenariat avec le secteur privé. Troisièmement, faire progresser le chantier de la couverture santé universelle. Nous espérons ainsi qu'à la fin de l'année prochaine, plus de 8 millions de Congolais supplémentaires auront accès à un système efficace de couverture maladie. D'autre part, la République démocratique du Congo vient de circonscrire son plan national du numérique dont la mise en œuvre impactera l'ensemble des secteurs de la vie nationale. En outre, la numérisation de l'économie permettra au pays d'enregistrer des progrès rapides dans la lutte contre la corruption et divers crimes économiques. Monsieur le Président, nos démocraties étant devenues particulièrement exigeantes et impatientes, il nous faut trouver des moyens de mise en œuvre de nos ambitions qui sortent des sentiers battus. Aussi, ai-je initié un vaste programme d'urgence de développement communautaire qui servira de levier pour accélérer la résorption des inégalités socio-économiques et spatiales au sein des villes et territoires. Il s'agira d'un programme spécial, multisectoriel et intégré, que je piloterai personnellement en vue de rattraper tant soit peu le retard du pays dans sa marche vers la réalisation des objectifs mondiaux de développement. Ce programme bénéficiera de l'appui stratégique et financier de l'ensemble des partenaires et de l'accompagnement du Programme des Nations Unies pour le développement. Il vise à accroître l'accès des populations aux services sociaux de base, notamment à travers la promotion des microcentrales hydroélectriques rurales, dont plus de 700 sites sont déjà identifiés. Le programme vise également le développement du capital humain ainsi que le renforcement de la connectivité des territoires à travers les pistes rurales. Monsieur le Président, le développement socio-économique de l'humanité à l'horizon 2030 sera durable ou ne le sera pas. À cet égard, notre sort à tous, riches ou pauvres, est plus que jamais lié. Par ses ressources naturelles et sa vitalité démographique, l'Afrique est devenue le pivot de cette durabilité. Dans cette Afrique, la nature a fait de mon pays le dépositaire de 47% des forêts du continent, lui conférant une responsabilité majeure face aux enjeux de survie de notre planète. J'ai déjà eu à le rappeler à plusieurs reprises. Il est impérieux et urgent de mettre à la disposition de notre continent de nouvelles sources d'énergie et de nouveaux modes de production compatibles avec la préservation de l'environnement et l'affirmation de notre droit inaliénable au développement. Nous sommes résolument engagés dans la protection de nos forêts. Cependant, la préservation de notre patrimoine naturel ne peut se faire au détriment de notre développement. Il est incompréhensible que les forêts du bassin du Congo, qui sont les mieux conservées au monde, ne captent que 1% des financements disponibles. Il est impératif que toute l'architecture financière internationale, en ce compris le Fonds monétaire international dans son rôle catalytique en matière de financement du développement, intègre davantage la donne environnementale dans son analyse des critères et des défis macroéconomiques liés à ces interventions dans les différents pays. En ce qui nous concerne, conscient du rôle majeur de la République démocratique du Congo à cet égard, notre gouvernement a relancé le dialogue avec ses principaux partenaires sur les questions environnementales, notamment ceux réunis dans le cadre de l'initiative pour les forêts d'Afrique centrale. Répondant à l'appel du secrétaire général des Nations Unies, notre gouvernement s'est engagé, par ma personne, à accroître le niveau de ses engagements au titre de sa contribution déterminée nationale et à maintenir une collaboration étroite entre pays de la sous-région afin de parler d'une seule voix pour toutes les grandes questions en rapport avec la protection des forêts. Mon gouvernement a fait de la production d'énergie propre et renouvelable la première de ses priorités économiques pour le quinquennat. Nous pouvons, moyennant des investissements agressifs et une politique attractive de protection de ces investissements, passer de moins de 10% d'électrification actuellement à 60% dans les 10 prochaines années, faisant reculer très significativement la consommation du bois de chauffe. Aussi, dans le cadre de la réalisation de notre mix énergétique, pour renforcer la lutte contre la déforestation, mon gouvernement encourage le développement de l'utilisation du gaz domestique dans les zones urbaines, périurbaines et rurales. À terme, nous voulons être l'endroit de la planète où le kilowattheure électrique sera le moins cher, grâce à l'exploitation de notre capacité de plus de 100 000 MW en hydroélectricité. Nous sommes disposés à encadrer davantage l'exploitation forestière et à étendre les réserves et parcs de protection naturelle afin d'augmenter notre biomasse et de protéger notre biodiversité. En revanche, cela ne peut s'entendre qu'avec, en contrepartie, la mise en œuvre effective d'une stratégie d'industrialisation éco-responsable concentrée autour des centres de production et de consommation et génératrice d'emplois pour notre jeunesse. Notre population, dont l'âge moyen est de 17 ans et demi, est à peine plus âgée que la jeune Greta et partage en partie ses préoccupations et ses intérêts. Mais comment nos jeunes vont-ils s'engager pour la même lutte quand ils n'ont ni eau ni lumière? J'ai également décidé de sortir progressivement mon pays d'un système agricole archaïque à faible productivité et destructeur de notre patrimoine forestier. À cet effet, nous allons promouvoir une agroforesterie qui maximise notre avantage comparatif pour certaines cultures en privilégiant les zones de savane. J'entends faire de la question environnementale une préoccupation omniprésente et transversale qui touche l'ensemble de nos politiques, stratégies, programmes et projets de développement. Monsieur le Président, au moment où je m'adresse au monde du haut de cette tribune pour la première fois, je me dois de rappeler la relation particulière que notre organisation entretient avec mon pays. Tout d'abord, cette relation suscite en moi un sentiment de reconnaissance. En effet, la République démocratique du Congo a souvent été au centre des préoccupations des Nations unies suite aux nombreuses crises qu'elle a traversées depuis son accession à l'indépendance. Depuis le décès tragique du secrétaire général Dag Hammarskjöld, en passant par les nombreux casques bleus tombés au combat, jusqu'à plus récemment l'odieux assassinat des experts onusiens Zaïda Catalan et Michael Sharp, l'Organisation des Nations Unies, plus que toute autre organisation internationale, a vécu dans sa chair les réalités que vivent de millions de mes compatriotes. L'ONU et ses nombreuses agences ont également déployé d'importants moyens pour soutenir la République démocratique du Congo. Je tiens donc à vous réitérer la gratitude du peuple congolais qui n'oubliera jamais le soutien de notre organisation. Cela étant dit, je ne peux m'empêcher de regretter que l'histoire de mon pays soit si douloureusement liée à l'ONU qui, 24 années durant, sur nos 59 années d'indépendance, y a déployé une mission de paix. Pourquoi, malgré cette longue présence, la plupart des espoirs de paix et de développement ont été déçus? Au-delà des choix et des responsabilités internes, on ne peut pas observer le Congo ou l'Afrique en isolation du reste du monde et des intérêts des autres. Que serait la trajectoire du Congo sans l'assassinat de Patrice Emery Lumumba? Que serait devenu mon pays si on l'avait laissé poursuivre son apprentissage démocratique pacifique de l'après-guerre froide sans passer par le détour d'une guerre venue d'ailleurs? Et sans vouloir remonter aussi loin dans le temps, nous vivons chaque jour ces chocs d'intérêts qui expliquent le plus souvent la fragilité récurrente de la République démocratique du Congo. Aujourd'hui, le plus grand défi de la République démocratique du Congo est celui de la paix, la sécurité et la stabilité. Depuis notre investiture, convaincus de l'absolue nécessité de la paix, nous nous sommes engagés sans réserve en faveur de la réalisation de cet objectif en prenant en compte toute sa dimension régionale et internationale. C'est dans cette perspective que j'ai proposé en juillet dernier au 39e sommet de la SADC tenu à Dar es Salaam la création d'une coalition régionale à l'image de la coalition mondiale contre le terrorisme pour éradiquer le fléau de l'insécurité créé par les groupes armés d'origine interne et externe. À l'est de mon pays, nos forces de sécurité se battent au quotidien avec le concours de la MONUSCO, déterminée à éradiquer les forces négatives qui sèment la mort et la désolation au sein de nos populations. Certains de ces mouvements rebelles, notamment les ADF-MTN, opèrent par des actes terroristes conformes à leur appartenance à Daesh, ce qui constitue une nouvelle menace tant pour mon pays que pour la sous-région. Comme si les conflits et l'instabilité ne suffisaient pas, ces contrées de l'Est de la République démocratique du Congo sont affectées depuis une année par une épidémie de la maladie à virus Ebola. Compte tenu de la gravité de la situation, j'ai mis en place en mai dernier une cellule technique qui travaille sous ma supervision, composée d'experts de renommée internationale et dirigée par notre compatriote, le professeur Jean-Jacques Mouyembe, qui est celui qui a identifié le virus d'Ebola et dont les travaux de recherche ont conduit à la découverte du MB114, une molécule thérapeutique pour le traitement de cette maladie. La nouvelle stratégie de riposte commence à produire ses effets, notamment dans la ville de Goma, qui est aujourd'hui à l'abri du virus. Même si beaucoup a été fait, l'épidémie n'est pas encore éradiquée. La stratégie sera renforcée par l'introduction de 5 nouveaux médicaments approuvés, en plus du vaccin contre la maladie à virus Ebola, qui permettront de se débarrasser complètement de ce fléau. Je voudrais saisir cette opportunité pour saluer l'élan de solidarité qui s'est manifesté de la part de nos partenaires bi- et multilatéraux, notamment l'Organisation mondiale de la santé, l'Union africaine, l'UNICEF, le Programme alimentaire mondial, la MONUSCO et bien d'autres. S'agissant particulièrement de cette mission onusienne, en cette période charnière de son futur en République démocratique du Congo, marquée par l'exercice d'une revue stratégique, je voudrais tout d'abord réitérer les remerciements du peuple congolais aux pays contributeurs pour les sacrifices humains et matériels consentis jusqu'à ce jour en faveur de mon pays. Je note une convergence de vues avec le secrétaire général quant à l'urgente nécessité de réadapter la configuration de la MONUSCO à l'évolution de la situation sur le terrain en concentrant davantage les efforts sur les capacités d'intervention opérationnelle des forces onusiennes aux côtés des forces armées de la République démocratique du Congo. En d'autres termes, la République démocratique du Congo a encore besoin de la MONUSCO, mais d'une MONUSCO non pléthorique, bien équipée, forte et dotée d'un mandat adapté à l'image de la brigade d'intervention rapide qui avait jadis aidé à mettre en déroute le mouvement rebelle des M23. Monsieur le Président, à l'instar d'autres pays en développement, la République démocratique du Congo aspire à l'émergence. nous sommes convaincus que notre pays, qui par sa position géostratégique se situe au carrefour des regroupements économiques d'Afrique centrale, d'Afrique australe et d'Afrique de l'Est, doit jouer la carte de l'intégration africaine comme moteur du développement et vecteur de paix entre les nations. C'est pourquoi nous avons soutenu le projet de zone de libre-échange continentale tout en étant conscients qu'il se mettra en œuvre par étapes successives. Ce processus passe inévitablement par l'harmonisation et le désarmement des barrières douanières. C'est dans cette vision que la République démocratique du Congo entend accélérer la mise en œuvre d'un programme de développement d'infrastructures à la hauteur de son immense superficie de 2 345 000 km² afin de relier le pays d'ouest en est et du nord au sud, de faciliter le transit des biens et des personnes et de libérer le potentiel agricole de nos provinces. Monsieur le Président, aujourd'hui, la République démocratique du Congo détient environ 70% des réserves mondiales des métaux stratégiques indispensables pour réaliser la transition énergétique et numérique qui s'impose à l'humanité. Plutôt que d'utiliser ces réserves naturelles de minerais comme source de rente monopolistique, mon pays se propose de s'ouvrir au monde en permettant l'exploitation réglementée de son sous-sol contre un accompagnement à l'industrialisation et à la production de batteries et de composants à plus haute valeur ajoutée. Le monde a soif de cobalt, de coltan et de lithium. Nous voulons des emplois industriels, de la formation et du développement. Enfin, la République démocratique du Congo dispose de 53% des réserves en eau douce de l'Afrique. Et une gestion durable de ce potentiel permettra un jour d'étancher la soif d'un quart des habitants de la planète. Monsieur le Président, nous vivons aujourd'hui une crise profonde de l'ordre international libéral. La loi du plus fort ne fera que renforcer les frustrations et les violences. À titre d'illustration, les récentes attaques contre des installations pétrolières en Arabie saoudite font craindre le risque d'un embrasement autour du détroit d'Ormuz qui paralyserait l'économie mondiale. Nous avons le devoir de dénoncer toute forme de réaction violente aux problèmes politiques qui peuvent se régler dans le dialogue et la concertation. Sommes-nous disposés à définir un nouvel ordre mondial au sein duquel l'Afrique et la République démocratique du Congo joueront le rôle que leur confèrent les mutations enregistrées? Je crois qu'une nouvelle voie est possible, sans doute la plus difficile, sans doute la plus complexe, la plus exigeante, qui nous impose de sortir des sentiers battus. Monsieur le Président, mon pays, la République démocratique du Congo, qui venait d'organiser pour la 3e fois des élections démocratiques et apaisées, a eu le bonheur de vivre, pour la première fois de son histoire, une alternance pacifique et démocratique, alors que bon nombre d'observateurs brossaient un tableau plutôt sombre et pessimiste de l'issue du processus électoral. Cette victoire historique est avant tout celle du peuple congolais, dont les intenses sacrifices consentis au cours de ces dernières années ont été récompensés par l'aboutissement heureux d'un processus électoral à haut risque. C'est aussi l'occasion de remercier la communauté internationale, notamment les pays de la SADC, le Kenya, l'Égypte et les USA, qui, sans atermoiement, ont encouragé ce pas de géant accompli par mon pays dans le processus de construction d'un État de droit. Depuis mon investiture, je m'emploie à considérer cette avancée démocratique en garantissant l'ensemble des droits et des libertés. Personne n'est harcelé pour ses opinions. La République démocratique du Congo ne compte plus de prisonniers de conscience. Nul ne ressent le besoin d'émigrer pour sauver sa vie ou préserver sa sécurité du fait de ses convictions politiques ou de ses associations particulières. S'agissant de la prise en compte du genre, même si nous ne sommes pas encore parvenus à la parité intégrale, je suis heureux de constater les progrès accomplis en République démocratique du Congo en la matière dans tous les secteurs. En faisant passer le taux de participation des femmes de 6% à 18%, le gouvernement actuel a atteint le niveau le plus élevé de participation féminine de l'histoire de mon pays. J'ai fait de l'approche genre l'un de mes engagements politiques prioritaires. Monsieur le Président, au niveau de la région, j'ai développé une intense activité diplomatique en vue de réaffirmer l'engagement continu de mon pays pour des relations de bon voisinage et en faveur d'une coexistence pacifique dans le respect de l'intégrité territoriale et de la souveraineté des autres nations. Dans ce sens, nous devons, nous, leaders africains, doter notre continent d'une voie consensuelle et harmonieuse fondée sur une politique véritablement africaine. Qu'il me soit permis d'exprimer ma profonde préoccupation sur ce qui se passe en mer Méditerranée où plusieurs personnes candidates à l'émigration meurent chaque jour dans des conditions inhumaines. Les vagues de réfugiés et les images bouleversantes que nous vivons ces dernières années sur les côtes européennes doivent interpeller nos consciences de dirigeants. Depuis le début de l'année 2015, plus de 500 000 migrants ont tenté de rejoindre l'Europe par la Méditerranée et plus de 5 000 d'entre eux ont péri durant la traversée. La gravité de ce désastre exige de nous des solutions urgentes et efficaces. Le Pacte mondial pour des migrations sûres, ordonnées et régulières que nous avons adopté à Marrakech en 2018 est notre réponse à la crise migratoire. Nous avons le devoir d'élaborer dans les meilleurs délais des initiatives nationales ambitieuses en vue de sa mise en œuvre. Mais notre meilleure arme, c'est d'agir en faveur du développement, de l'équité et de la stabilité partout dans le monde. Je saisis par ailleurs cette opportunité pour revendiquer du haut de cette tribune la levée intégrale des sanctions qui touchent encore la République du Zimbabwe, et ce depuis 2002. Ces sanctions ne se justifient plus dès lors que le pays a ouvert un nouveau chapitre de son histoire et s'est montré ouvert à coopérer avec le monde. Le maintien de ces sanctions est injuste. Il entrave l'attractivité du pays aux investissements étrangers et il affecte non seulement le Zimbabwe, mais aussi l'ensemble de la région. Monsieur le Président, Mesdames, Messieurs, la priorité absolue de mon action est d'offrir une perspective de dignité à nos populations, de promouvoir la création d'emplois, notamment pour les jeunes, et de lutter contre la précarité et l'exclusion. Et cette Assemblée qui veut réduire les inégalités et construire un monde plus inclusif peut être le porte-voix de ces laissés-pour-compte. Le défi est énorme, mais ce qui fait de nous des humains, c'est notre capacité à trouver des solutions, même les plus improbables, lorsque cela s'impose. Je vous remercie.
En nombre de la Asamblea General, deseo dar las gracias al excelentísimo Félix Antoine Tshilombo Tshisekedi por la declaración que acaba de formular. Ruego a los representantes que permanezcan sentados mientras despedimos al jefe de Estado. La Asamblea escuchará un discurso del excelentísimo Igor Dodon, presidente de Moldova. Pido protocolo que acompañe a su excelencia. En nombre de la Asamblea General, tengo el honor de dar la bienvenida a las Naciones Unidas al excelentísimo Igor Dodon, presidente de la República de Moldova, a quien invito a dirigirse a la Asamblea.
Stimate domnule președinte, excelențe, distins auditoriu, sunt onorat să mă alătur domniilor voastre și să iau cuvântul pentru prima dată de la tribuna Organizației Națiunilor Unite. Aderarea Republicii Moldova la ONU, participare activă în toate instituțiile organizației, dar și posibilitatea...
Oui, chers amis internautes, bonjour chez vous. Vous venez donc d'assister à l'allocution livrée par le président de la République, Félix Antoine Tshisekedi, du haut de la tribune de l'ONU. Et c'était un réel plaisir pour nous et un privilège de pouvoir vous diffuser en direct dans de très bonnes conditions, donc avec une image de qualité, un son de qualité, cette allocution. Et je voulais en profiter pour remercier tous nos amis qui nous ont aidés, soutenus pour que nous puissions réaliser ces directs. Je penserai ici à David Mbaya, David Kabamba Mbaya. Je penserai ici à... Il y a beaucoup de gens, maman, Yoa Kabe. Je penserai ici à Claude Moutoka. En tout cas, vous avez été nombreux à pouvoir nous aider. Ce n'est pas fini, nous allons continuer dans la mesure du possible à vous diffuser les activités du président au niveau des États-Unis. Dieu voulant, nous allons améliorer encore petit à petit nos programmes de diffusion et pourquoi pas monter une chaîne de télévision de manière effective sur place au Congo, en République démocratique du Congo. Sur ce, nous avons besoin, en tout cas de vos conseils, nous avons besoin de votre soutien, nous avons besoin de votre partnership. Hein, c'est très très important. Vous savez, le président a parlé donc de l'amour lors de son entretien avec TV5. Et l'amour supporte tout, l'amour croit tout, l'amour pardonne. Hein, l'amour ne s'enfle point d'orgueil. L'amour te pousse à booster l'autre pour qu'il soit en mesure de bien faire, de mieux faire, de donner le meilleur de lui-même. Et nous avons donc besoin de cet amour de votre part. Je vais ici interrompre donc cette diffusion. Je veux seulement avoir des j'aime ici. Mettez-moi de j'aime s'il vous plaît. Si vous avez aimé ce direct, vous avez apprécié la qualité de l'image, vous avez apprécié le son, mettez-moi de j'aime ici en bas. J'ai besoin de voir vos j'aime et des cœurs s'il vous plaît. Mettez-moi des j'aime au maximum. Mettez-moi de j'aime. Même ceux qui au pesingata $1 te, mais bah j'aime na yo au salanga bien au salanga plaisir makasi. bopesa nga ba j'aime na se awa eyosala nga plaisir ya trop ba j'aime ebele 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 botiela nga ba j'aime ba j'aime ba j'aime ba j'aime na posa maximum de j'aime ba maximum de j'aime na bino botiela nga ba j'aime kitoko ezalaka nde boye merci merci na bino nyonso pona kozala elongo na biso nalingi natikela bino bolanda allocution et à président Oyo Amati Nicolas Tribune pendant quelques minutes et puis nous allons interrompre notre direct. Je vous aime tellement, vous êtes précieux pour moi, voilà pourquoi j'aime toujours vous offrir des choses de qualité. Merci à vous, chères excellences. À la prochaine.
În sporirea rolului femeii în procesul decizional. Atât Parlamentul, Guvernul Republicii Moldova, cât și autonomia găgăuză sunt conduse de femei. Acestea reprezentând 65% din numărul membrilor Guvernului și 25% din membrii Parlamentului țării. Nu uităm și despre rolul femeii în orice societate, cel de mamă și de centru al universului familiei. Tocmai pentru a focaliza atenția statului asupra necesității protejării și stimulării creierii și păstrării familiilor, am decretat anul 2019 anul familiei în Republica Moldova. Dragi prieteni,